everybody. Today we are here for an episode of Interview with an Astrologer. I have Zane Stein here. I'm really excited to have him here. Say hey if you want to.
Hey.
I'm going to be asking some questions about his career. And I guess I'll start off with the first one that I have, which is just a pretty basic one, which is what sparked your interest in astrology in the first place? What was the initial spark?
Well, I would love to say it was something spiritual, but it was basically, I was a freshman in college, and I was walking down the hallway in the student union building where the students go for coffee and stuff. And I saw this, what I thought was an absolutely beautiful girl down sitting at a table. And I'm a Gemini, so I have no trouble going up to total strangers. And so I decided wanted to see if I could find an opening to meet her. So I got up there, and she's looking at this book, and then she's taking a pen and she's copying something onto a circle apparently from the book, looking at the book, copying a circle. And I said, now I was no longer just interested in the girl. I was curious, what the heck is this she's doing? I said, excuse me, but may I ask you what you're doing? And she looked up real quickly, and then she said, I'm working on an astrological chart. And I said, you don't really believe in astrology, do you? Now, if you know astrology at all, when I tell you her sign, you can imagine the look she gave me. She was a Scorpio with a Scorpio moon. She looked straight through the back of my head and in the most deadpan voice said, what's your birth date? And I gave her my birth date, and she turned the pages, which I later found out was an ephemeris, and she started telling me things about myself that there's no way she could have possibly known ever. And that's how I got interested in astrology. We became friends. I started going to her, learning some astrology from her. That summer, I went home to my parents' house for summer vacation. I bought astrology books. I started reading everything I can. I started asking all my friends their birth dates. And when I went back in the following fall, I knew more astrology than she did, and she started coming to me for lessons. That's how I got into astrology, basically.
That's cool. Yeah, when the person, it's like the student became the teacher at that point. What books did you devour first? Like what were you, what astrologers were you drawn to read?
Well, one of the first books that I got was by an author by Ellen McCaffrey. It was called Astrology Home Study Course, and it was a blue hardback, and it was basically teaching you astrology. And I picked that up because it promised to teach me astrology, and it did teach me the beginnings. But I went from there. I got several other books. Another one that I used in my early days is a book called Astrology by Ronald C. Davison. And he had a section, there was like cookbook, Venus in Aries is this, Venus is in the 12th house is this, like a sentence of each. It wasn't long before I started picking up books by Alan Oken, and from there, and Michael Myers, I think it was Michael Myers, and then I discovered Dane Rudyard.
Okay.
And when I discovered Dane Rudyard, that was it. I knew that I was going to spend the rest of my life in astrology because this man spoke to me.
Yeah. No, I understand. I understand that. Did you have any actual teacher? I mean, I realize you can have teachers from just a book, but did you ever have any teachers that you know, sat with or anything like that, or was it all just like self-taught book learning?
Okay. I didn't have any teachers per se. There was a time where a friend of mine and I used to go to hear speakers across the river in New Jersey, in Princeton, New Jersey, at an astrological society, and I would go to hear other astrologers. And then this friend of mine once took me. We took a trip to New York. There was an author who had a book she was coming out with, and this was well, somewhere around 1980. And it turned out it was the very first book on astrology and the asteroids. It was a book by an author named Ellie Bach, and this was her publishing party. And at the publishing party, there was an astrologer I met there named Al H. Morrison, who was a New York astrologer. And we connected, and he became my mentor. At first, it was all by posts, by letters. Eventually, I would go and meet with him at his apartment in New York, and he would tell me things, but not so much a teacher as sharing knowledge type of thing. And when I had my book on Chiron published later, he's the one that published it in his living room. He had a book binding machine, and he hand bound every one of those books. So he was my mentor, and I learned from him. But I've never had a class.
I never have either. It's always, it's just been, I was just curious. I'm self-taught as well. Like, yeah, I get it. Okay, so you brought up Chiron. This is a good segue into what I was going to ask next.
Okay.
since you have different names like Captain Chiron and Mr. Chiron, which I mean, and all the work that you've done on Chiron, these are fitting. They're very, very fitting. Okay, so Chiron was discovered in 1977.
Correct.
And you saw something in, what was it, the New York Times or something
Yes,
about it being the 10th planet being discovered. And when I think about, like, I work a lot with Chiron myself. Like, I don't feel like you can read a fucking chart without looking at Chiron. You just can't. I'm sorry, you just can't. And I know that there are astrologers who disagree with me. I don't give a shit. You just can't. And I think to myself, you were in the game before it was even known. Like, that to me is crazy when I think about that. Like, there was a time when this wasn't known. So what was that like when it was discovered, and how did that change how you did astrology? And
Well, okay. So I'll just give you a couple of the details about that New York Times and stuff. I was married and to someone, and I had a day job, and I came home from work, and she said, "I heard on the radio that they discovered the 10th planet." Now, like I said, I'm a Gemini, and so my curiosity is unbelievable. I said, "Oh, wow, tell me about it." She says, "That's all I know. I heard it while I was washing dishes." And so I went to the library, and there they had newspapers, and my first thought was, if there's any truth to this, there would be in a big newspaper like New York Times. And I looked through a couple of issues, and there I found on the front page headlines, 10th planet discovered. And there was a picture of the solar system with a little dot, and it was right between the orbits of Saturn and Uranus. That's all, and it's a very famous picture. A lot of people have referred to this over the years. And in the article, there were two people's names. There was the person who discovered it. His name is Charles Kowal, the astronomer. And there was the name of a person who had been interviewed about the body, because he collects data from other astronomers on new bodies named Dr. Brian Marsden. He was like a big name in the field. So I wrote to both of them, and surprisingly, they both wrote back.
Not really. That that is. I mean, that is really cool that you actually had like they both wrote back, especially Dr. Marsden. Because like I was talking to you earlier, like I've tried reaching out to people in the science community to ask about the galactic center and things like that. I pretty, without getting told to fuck off, it's pretty much like getting told to fuck off. Like
yeah, and I do understand, because there's, you know, if you go on the web, there are people that seem to go out of their way to make fun of astrologers. You know, I mean, yeah, but so to make the long story short, Dr. Marsden sent me an early ephemeris. It was just for a couple of months because that's all they knew at the time, and I contacted my mentor, Al Morrison. I said, do you know how to convert this? Because it's in astronomical stuff, and I don't know what right ascension is. So he found somebody, and back in those days, home computers were not too common. There was one called a TRS-80. It was a small home computer in the early days, and she converted it into Zodiac, and then we formed what's called a Chiron committee. There was 5 of us, and we started plugging Chiron into charts. And we couldn't look at our birth chart because we didn't have it back that far, but we could look at it as a transiting body. And we kept on finding it happen at turning points, at things that seem at the time maybe rather inconvenient, but turned out to be better in the long run. That's what we've found. Al called it an inconvenient benefic. That was his phrase. And then when we got more data, he published a ephemeris for like 10 years and sent it out free to anybody who would send him a self-addressed stamped envelope. So there were hundreds of people that got Chiron ephemeris in the early days totally for free for 10 years. And later on, he published 100-year. But anyway, at that point, I formed an organization, which I call the Association for Studying Chiron. And I started sending out letters to everybody I knew in astrology and asking them. I had, at one point, I had people in 6 continents that were sending me what they discovered about Chiron based on this ephemeris, and I put it in a newsletter and sent the newsletter out to all these people. And it basically, that was the early research on Chiron. And when it was first discovered, we didn't have a name. It was called Object Koal. So if you look at the symbol, it's like a K over an O. One of the explanations is that the OK for Object Koal is in that that symbol. Now that's not the only explanation, but that's part of it. And so yeah, how did it change my astrology? Well, first of all, it turned me into an astrologer who was doing research out of curiosity, to an astrologer who was doing research because he wanted to share his findings with the world. That's what it did for astrology. There was just so much here, and I just thought, wow, I can't keep this to myself. And I didn't do it because I wanted to be known as Mr. Chiron. I just did it because I couldn't help myself.
It just had to be shared. It had to come out. No, I get it. I do get it. It's like, and you're excited about it, and you want to give it out to the world.
Yeah, I likened it to a parent who shows these photos of his new child to everybody he meets.
Here, look at my kid. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I could see that. Yeah, I noticed on I was looking things up about you, that the the Association for Studying Chiron was formed in 78 and then it went on through 86, correct?
Yes.
I was it just kind of a natural progression of something ending, or was it like
No. Okay. I actually left astrology for a while.
oh,
Um, and it was, to make a very, very long story short, I was dating a girl. My marriage had ended. I was dating a girl, and her brother was a very gung-ho evangelical Christian, and
oh,
my girlfriend talked me into getting involved in Christianity, and so at one point I left astrology. My logic was not that it was bad, but that I couldn't find any way to connect it with the Christianity that I was being taught. They didn't seem like they were on the same page, so I left astrology, and I even posted a letter to the Mercury Hour, which at that time was sort of like Facebook in print. You know, people would send in letters, and it was nothing but people's letters of astrology. And basically, so when I left astrology, it's documented. And the reason I made a point in there saying that I'm not condemning astrology. I just cannot see that, that it's of value to somebody who gives their life to Christ. That was the gist of it. And then it was a few years later that I got involved with another girl, and she became a girlfriend. And she basically, you know, talked me into, picking up astrology again. She was just so curious. She was very Aquarian, and my daughter, my older daughter, one time thanked her. She said, "I don't know what you did, but you gave my father back to me. He wasn't my father when he wasn't an astrologer." Yeah. So that's the reason the organization ended. I left astrology.
can I ask when you came back? Like, because I did notice that I did, read like a bullet point thing of your biography. It did say something in around like 86, 87 or whatever that you took time out, but it wasn't real. Yeah.
I have no problem mentioning the reason, but I don't publish it as the reason. I don't say, "Hey, and you got to know I did this." But yeah, I left it in early '87. I closed the organization in the end of '86. I think it was November, and then I came back about 1991.
Okay, so
it was only a few years.
what was it like when you came back? Was it like meeting an old friend, or was there any like,
Yeah. Yeah, and I have this wonderful friend of mine named Larry, who lives in Pennsylvania, and Larry saved all of my books and all of my magazines. I gave them to him when I left astrology, because, like I said, I was not anti-astrology. I just didn't want to. He saved it for me, knowing that I'd be back. So I got all my magazines back, all my books. I got handwritten charts for my sister that I'd done for her of all the family members and stuff. So I was only back for maybe 6 months, and I had a local shop wanting me to give a talk on astrology. I only been back in for about 6 months. So.
I love that. I love that that held on to all that for you, and was it? It's like he was like, he'll be back. Like he'll be back. I love it. But let me ask you this though. Having that, kind of like perspective shift or whatever, going into the evangelical Christianity and then coming back to astrology, did it change anything about like the way that you practiced, or the way just having that life experience, say, and then coming, you know what I mean?
Yeah. I tell you one thing, and I need to tell a little aside, tie it into it. Several years later, I had a local organization contact me, and they said that they were going to have a rabbi talk about the Jewish understanding of astrology, and they wanted to know if I'd be interested in co-hosting this and talking as an astrologer. And so, of course, I like to talk, so I said yes, and I met the rabbi, and he was actually a rabbi, and he had researched it, and I had to research it in order so that we were on the same page. One of the things that I got out of that was that the ancient Jews believed wholeheartedly in astrology, but they believed there was a proper use for it and an improper use for it. And the proper use for it is listening to the guidance of the Creator. If you look in the Bible, it says that he put the planets and the lights in the heavens for signs and for seasons. It actually says that in the Old Testament. And the idea is that the ancient Jews believed if he put them in the heavens for signs, he must have given his people the ability to read the signs. A misuse of astrology is astrology to get rich, astrology to see if you can find out how to bed a member of the opposite sex, astrology for gambling, astrology for self. A proper use of astrology is to bring you closer to God by understanding the messages God is giving you. It is that philosophy that is more what I got out of being in Christianity for a while. I kept the idea of wanting to hear God's words, but I then got the understanding that it's not just somebody on a hill in the Bible that heard the words from coming out of a burning bush. God's words are also in the solar system that he created, and all you have to do is attune ourselves to be able to understand them. So to make the long story short, I decided any astrology that doesn't have help you become more spiritual, or it doesn't have a spiritual feel to it, anything that is self-oriented is not a valuable tool, but anything that helps you grow more on a spiritual path, that's the value of astrology.
That makes sense to me. And actually, what you have, I had people in my ex-husband's family that like to. Long story short, they didn't really agree with what I do. And I would kind of bring up the same thing that, the Bible passages that, that you were talking about.
Yeah.
And it well, it shut him up for a little while, but not for, but yeah, I mean, I think yeah, I think if you're using it for, to come closer to God or source or whatever, to understand how we are all divine, and contact. I think, yeah, that does seem like a good way to use it. Okay, so you come back. Did the work with Chiron continue? I also know that you started working with Pholus, and
Yeah, so this is basically it. So I came back into astrology and I picked up Chiron right away. And one of the things that happened is that I contacted my friend Al, my mentor, telling him I was back in astrology. And he said, it's about time, this is still by mail. Al never used computers his entire life, just so you know. It was all by mail or telephone. And he said, and your timing is perfect because they've just discovered another body like Chiron. And I want to put out an ephemeris of it. And so he told me what it was. And I was still in touch with Dr. Marsden, and I got some information from Dr. Marsden. I got the ephemeris for the body, which was called Pholus. And I researched it, and we published the ephemeris, and I researched the astronomy of it. I have this great article that appeared in Science News, and the headline was "Son of Chiron now appearing in space." Yeah, I love that kind of editorial thing. Pholus, like Chiron, gets close to Saturn, but unlike Chiron, Pholus not only crosses out to Uranus, but actually passes Uranus and almost gets to Neptune's orbit. So it's like Chiron with an even more stretched orbit. And it also turned out that they had a lot of differences. Pholus is very, very red. If you look at a telescope, it's like as red as the planet Mars, because it's got a lot of iron in its material. And then the year after that, they discovered another one. And by this time, astronomers decided they were going to call them centaurs. We had two, now we have three. And this one was named Nessus, after another centaur who was a really nasty piece of work. So by this time, I was very, very enthused. I started researching this body too, and I formed a new organization, this one online, which was basically about Centaurian bodies and stuff like that. And I think it was a Yahoo group, which I don't have Yahoo groups anymore, but it was something like that. And then the bodies kept coming, and I kept on, working on each new one. Last time I checked, there was something like 18 centaurs with names, something like that. A lot. Some of them I found are really powerful. Some of them, maybe because they're so small or whatever, but some I haven't really found a lot of significance. But I actually had a series of articles in the Mountain Astrologer on about 6 or 7 of these centaurs. They made it a series once a month, several months.
Which ones do you feel like are the most? I mean, obviously Chiron is maybe one of the most powerful, but which other ones do you feel like are like the most, like in readings or?
Okay. The two that I use the most often, besides Chiron, are Nessus and one called Cariclo, which starts with a CH.
Yes.
Yeah.
Chiron's partner.
Yes, and I'm in love with Cariclo.
Me too.
Nessus is basically, I'll give you very short Nessus story, and I'll give you a very short Caracos story. In the mythology, Hercules had just gotten married to a new bride named Daenerys, and he was taking her back to his home, and they came across this big stream, and it was so deep that if he walked across it, he would be underwater. Now, he was a demigod, so he could breathe underwater. He's immortal, but his wife Daenerys was immortal. He was trying to figure out how to get her across. And there was this centaur on the banks of the river. And now, I don't know if you know what a horse called a Clydesdale looks like. It's a very huge horse. If you ever see those old commercials, Budweiser, they had a team of horses. Those are Clydesdale. They're huge horses, all right? So the centaurs were huge horses. And so Nessus comes and he says, I'll be happy to take your bride across the river on my back. And Nessus was so big he could go across the water and she would remain above water. So Hercules said, okay. And he started going across the stream, and he went and underwater. When he came out, he saw Nessus on the bank of the other river trying to rape his new bride. And I don't know any human being that would not want to kill, right?
Yeah.
But he was a demigod, and so I mean, he took his bow and arrow immediately, and he shot Nessus. Now Nessus is lying on the banks of this river, and Nessus is, like I said, he's a real piece of work. He calls Daenerys over, and he wants to whisper something in her ear, and he says, I'm so sorry for what I did, and I realize I deserve my death. I want to make it up to you. I know you're immortal, and your husband is a god, and you're going to be getting older, and he's not. And someday, on one of his many journeys, he will be tempted by another woman. I want you to take this cloak that I'm wearing that's got my blood on it and put it away. And when that does happen, if you put this cloak over Hercules' shoulders, he will forget any other woman and come back to you. And then she says, okay, and then Nessus dies. But Nessus, that was basically his final revenge for what happened to him, because Hercules did at one point give his wife suspicion. He was away for a long time. And I don't know whether he came back with perfume on his clothes or lipstick on his collar, but anyway, cloak and put it on his shoulders. And unlike what she was told, he starts burning up. I mean, not flames, but like he was sunburned, only 1,000 times worse. He was like burning up, and it was in a lot of pain, but he was immortal. And he prayed to the gods in heaven, and Hera, or Juno, who had never liked him, that's another story, but she had a change of heart. She saw how much he was suffering, and she told him, build a funeral pyre and jump into it, and it will burn off this, and you'll ascend to Mount Olympus. That's what he did. He jumped in the fire. He was transformed, and he became a god, and he joined the other gods. So that terrible act of Nessus ended up turning him from a demigod into a full god. So that's the story of Nessus, and there are a lot of stories about Nessus in charts. Some of them show about how ways that we see ourselves as a monster.
Okay.
Some of them are ways where we listen to that part of ourselves that is the dark side, that has less than positive results, motives. Okay, so that's the short of Nessus. Caraclo, I want you to think about Chiron. When he was born, the first thing he heard, his mother took one look at him and said, "Get this monstrosity out of my sight. I never want to see him." His own mother called him a monster. His father, who happened to be Kronos or Saturn, had been having an affair with a woman and heard Rhea, his wife, coming, and he turned himself into a horse to gallop away. But he was in the process of finishing having sex with this woman. So when she conceived a centaur. And so this particular centaur was, she conceived a centaur. He conceived Chiron. And so the first thing he heard was that he's a horrible monster. Can you imagine if the first thing you heard when you were old enough to understand words, in mythology, they understood words at first, right? Was that you're a horrible monster. What did carry that wound inside of you, right? So that's the backstory. So he did all these great things. He healed others. He taught others, but that's that wound that he carried. So this is this wood nymph named Caraclo, and she spies Chiron in the woods one time, and she's totally head over heels in love with him. Love at first sight, but she knows that he is not going to give her the time of day because she's a wood nymph and he's a centaur. So in order to get close to him, she transforms herself into what she thinks is the most beautiful sight on earth, Chiron. So a female version of Chiron. She transforms herself into centaur. And so when he finds out that she thought he was so beautiful, that she was so, that she just wanted to be with him, that she was willing to turn herself into the same form. Imagine what that did to him, who had always seen himself as a monster. Here's somebody that not only didn't see him as a monster, but thought what he was beautiful. And that's one of the things about Caraclo, is that it helps us to see ways where we see ourselves as bad or monstrous, but we're under a misunderstanding, maybe we were told that. Maybe we heard our parents or somebody say, "You're a horrible child," or something. Well, we need something to come and help us to see that it's not true. I once saw a bumper sticker which impressed me. It says, "God doesn't make junk." Right? Right. So what we may have horrible traits, but we're not monsters, and that's Caraclo. It helps us to see that we're not monsters, and it helps us to talk to our Chiron to expedite the healing process.
Yeah, that's one of the ways that I personally do like to work with her, like in more like Chiron focused readings, is kind of like she can be a way for Chiron to kind of be healed, or you know what I mean, take on some of that. Sounds weird, taking on some of that pain, but that's not totally how I mean it, but kind of transmutes that pain, if you will. Yeah. So those two, Nessus and I think I pronounce it Triclo. I'm not pronouncing it right. I guess I have been pronouncing it right all along.
That's all right. I still have people ask me, what do you know about Chiron? So it's okay. You know,
I pronounce a lot of things like shit though. So. But so you think that those two are like very like important to?
I can't say that it's a universal truth that those two are the most important. Those are the two that I find are most significant. I mean, there's a pair of centaurs, you know, and they must be studied together because they were lovers, and when one died, the other one died because her love died, like Romeo and Juliet.
I don't know.
Yeah, it's Solaris, yeah. And so I one of the articles I wrote for the Mountain Astrologer was on that pair, and I found that you know, I found, for example, connections between those two in the charts of John Lennon and Yoko Ono. You know, but anyway, and there's one I really love, but I haven't found as much significance with Okiro. Okiro was the child of Chiron and Carrico. Great mythology, Okiro, but I haven't found a lot of powerful significance like I have some of the other centaurs. So
when did you start studying that one?
when did I start what?
When did you start studying that one?
As soon as as soon as they're named, I start studying them.
When was that one? I'm not quite as familiar with. When was it named? Do you know that particular?
I'd actually have to look it up. It's on my website, but I don't remember.
Okay. So pretty much like when they get named, you're like, we're going into this.
Well, you know, and I think it's important for tell you another story here. I was working with a number of astrologers. One of them was in Germany, and one of them I think is in where is he? Austria. But anyway, and he and I we did a lot of exchanging of ideas on the different centaurs, and we were studying them, including the ones that hadn't been named yet. And he and I, independent of each other, both decided that this third centaur, by what we saw in charts, fit Nessus. So I sent Dr. Marsden saying, I know that we don't name it. I know the astronomers name the bodies, but if you have any, if they accept suggestions, I'd love to see this one named Nessus. My friend Robert in Germany, basically slightly different words, but he also sent the same name as a suggestion to Dr. Marsden. I got a letter from Dr. Marsden saying that, well, he can't guarantee it. He will suggest the name. And sure enough, that's what it was named. So this body was named by astrologers, which is, you know, and that's there were a couple others after that were also named by us. We also submitted a few others more as a team this time. So that's something a lot of people don't know.
That's cool. That's very cool. Outside of the centaurs, do you work with any other asteroids? Which ones do you like the most? Which ones, you know, or like the most, meaning that you use them the most?
Okay, well, it's a good question. Here's the thing. At one point, asteroids were these bodies in the asteroid belt. And that's all they didn't know there were any other bodies out there. and they've kind of lumped a lot of things into asteroids. But
Yeah.
I always feel that asteroids should be the asteroid belt. But there are some bodies they call dwarf planets.
Uh-huh.
And the first one of these was one called Eris. And it was basically, Eris turned out to be, it's a body that takes about 500 and some years to go around the solar system. And when they first discovered it, they thought it was larger than Pluto. They had this big thing, the International Astronomical Union, they had a conference and they voted on changing the definition to give an official definition to the planet. And in the definition, Eris did not fit, neither did Pluto. So they came up with a new category they called dwarf planets, and they demoted Pluto to a dwarf planet, and Eris is a dwarf planet, and Eris I found very, very significant. It's unbelievably significant. It's I think that the story of Eris that most people know is there was this wedding, and the gods were all invited except one. Eris was not invited. Now, Eris was the goddess of discord, right? And she loved upsetting the apple cart, as they say. So, would you want to invite discord to your wedding now? Anyway, so she crashes the wedding, and she sees three goddesses at one place. There was Aphrodite or Venus. There's Hera, which is Juno, and there was Pallas Athena. And she rolls this apple. It's a golden apple, which she had engraved on it for the fairest, right down the middle of the aisle, and it lands at the feet of these three goddesses. And each one insisted it must be for her. Which probably says more about the male attitude in Greek and Rome about women and their vanity than it does about any mythological concepts. But anyway, so they're having a big fight, and the host pleads with Zeus, Jupiter, can you please intervene? We can't have this going on. This is a wedding, And Zeus realizes that one of them is his wife and the other two are his sisters. He can't possibly decide which one's the fairest. He can't possibly alienate two of them for the one. So he sends Mercury to fetch somebody who is totally innocent, a shepherd named Paris. And he says, Paris, would you come to help solve this issue? And so Paris, when the gods call, you go. And so the way I picture it, Pallas Athena promises Pallas that he would be the head of a great army that would conquer lands far and wide. And Paris promises that he would be on a throne and be king of land as far as the eye could see. And Venus Aphrodite promises him that she will give him his heart's desire. And the way that I always picture it, she's the goddess of love and beauty. What she says is, and I will give you what you desire. And she drops her cloak, and she's standing totally naked in front of him to give you the full impact of what. So to me, that's the reason he chose her rather than the other two. And so his heart's desire was the most beautiful woman in all the known world named Helen of Troy. And so, true to her word, she arranges for Helen to be kidnapped and brought to Paris to be his wife. And the Trojans wanted their Helen back. And this started a war between Sparta and Troy, which is called the Trojan War. And it all started because discord they tried to keep discord out of the wedding and ended up with the worst disaster possible. Anyway, so that's Eris, and one of the things Eris will do is she'll rock the boat. She'll rock the boat, and there are times when you know it needs to be rocked. You know, when things have gotten complacent, but nobody likes that. But what a lot of people don't know about Eris is that she was also the goddess that was invited to all the great Olympics, as she encouraged each athlete to do their best, to bring out their best, to compete. She was at all of the great debates occurring, encouraging all the great debaters to bring out their best to debate verbally. So on a positive level, she stirs one to positive competition, to bring out the best both in you and the other side. Anyway, so she is my number one minor planet that I study.
What any others that?
Oh, there's lots. Yeah. When there's one called Sedna, which is thousands of years in orbit, you know, and there's Haumea and Maki Maki that were named after goddesses from you know, non-European cultures. And one of the things Al and I did after Chiron, we started publishing some ephemeris of some asteroids. So at one point we had like 13 ephemeris. There was Apollo, and there was Sappho, and there was Toro, and there was Atlantis, and there was Damocles, and there's a whole bunch of asteroids, and I studied that. Yeah.
Well, when you study them, is it primarily like, and then try to like delineate them in the chart? Is it primarily like the mythology that you look to?
Well, no, because if you only look to mythology, then there's a good chance that you're going to be putting your own perceptions into it. So what I would do is I would study it, and if what I found seemed to fit with the astrology, then I would tie it into the myth. But I wouldn't. I didn't put the myth first.
Okay. You would look at kind of like observing what it does, like in the sky, and then see if it.
Yeah. For example, the asteroid Toro is not named after a god. Toro is the one of the words in Spanish for bull, right? And there is an element in Toro of like a bull in a china shop type of thing, right? But it's one of the things we studied. There's one called Hidalgo, and Hidalgo was not a god, but he was a man who, after his death, was kind of mythologized. Hidalgo became the role model for the Mexicans who overthrew the Spanish rule and became an independent country. He was a priest who led the early revolution, and he was martyred. And this was named after him. And so I found some elements of this mythology of the stories about him in the findings, but there's also a lot of things that were not that would not be in there as well.
Okay. Okay. Well, that's good to kind of see how I like to see how people read these kind of what they, because I fuck around a lot with the asteroids myself, but it's cool to hear, and the minor planets or dwarf planets. I think it's cool to hear.
There's just so many that if you're doing charts for clients, you have to have a much narrower approach. If you're doing it just study to see what's what, then you can look at dozens of different bodies and charts and stuff. But I once put a Solar Fire, which is the main astrology program I use. You can put 50 minor planets in a chart at one time, right? You can actually put you can't read a chart with 50 asteroids in it. You just can't.
No, you can't. No, I have people sometimes clients reach out for asteroid sorts of readings, and they'll throw in like a shitload that they want me to look at. I'm like, okay. We're going to break this down. We're going to do a little bit, at a time, and kind of focus on the ones that seem the most, because people, they're just curious about like what these different things mean in their chart. But some asteroids are going to be more important for a person than other ones. Yeah. So I do try to focus on those. But no, you can't read 50 fucking asteroids. And it starts becoming very cluttered very quickly. Kind of like what I think I've asked all of the stuff that I was going to ask. If there's anything that I didn't ask that you would like to.
Yeah. Okay. I just thought I'd mention, I mentioned this to you before the interview we were talking. I'm married to an Australian woman. She's basically one of the main reasons I moved to Australia. And she's also an astrologer. And she came up with this great idea, which I've joined with her. And we formed something called the Astrology Collective. And this is kind of like a idea of bringing people together in an astrological community. So we have speakers who come and speak on Zoom, like you and I are talking with this interview. We have chat rooms on Zoom where we come together and we look at something current in the charts of all the people who are in that chat room. So we all contribute our thoughts on each person's chart, like a whole bunch of astrologers all looking at your chart. And next person's chart, we all look at it. And not everybody talks about every chart, but it's a community. So this is something, it's called the Astrology Collective. And if anybody's interested, it's astrologycollective.org is our website. And so this is one of the big things I'm doing when I'm not looking at Chiron and all these other bodies, is working on this with my partner.
Very cool. Very, very cool. And where else can you be found online?
Well, my Chiron website is Zane Stein, all one word, .com / Chiron .htm, and my email address, and I'm a Gemini. I must admit it. I have about a half dozen email addresses, but probably the one that's easiest to remember is mr.chiron. So Mr. Chiron at zanestein.com.
Okay, and I will also put the links in the description box below for anybody that wants to check you out. And I hope that they do, because they should. Everybody should. Yeah, I think we'll go ahead and stop here though. Thank you so much for wanting to do this. Like for real. Thank you. You made my fucking day. Like,
This is my pleasure.
yeah, thank you. And to everybody else watching this, I'll see y'all later. Okay.